Thank you very much, Brendan, and thank you to those of you who have stayed behind for what promises to be a very engaging discussion around critical minerals. If I can ask our panellists to please join me on stage. As they make their way on the stage, I will introduce them. It looks like Tim's going to be first. Tim Harrison, the Managing Director of Ionic Rare Earths. As the name would suggest, they have rare earths in Uganda. Just stepping on the stage to my left is Simon Hay, Managing Director of Leo Lithium. They have a lithium project in Mali. We have just taking a seat next to Simon, Claire Pope from PwC, and I think also still in her role as the chair of the Australia South Korea Business Council. And next to Claire is Andrew Spinks, Managing Director of Ecograph, who have got a bit of a hybrid of sort of projects in both Tanzania and also here in Western Australia. So I will take a seat next to Simon and we'll get underway. So yes, thanks very much to everyone for joining us. It will be an interactive session and there will be some time for some questions towards the end. So please start to plot those down as we go. As we all know, it's obviously been a very interesting time for critical minerals. We've seen many economies around the world do some quite interesting things. In fact, with the way that the economies are going through different geopolitical situations around the world, the demand for critical minerals has become more and more front and centre, and so many countries out there are looking to secure their own supply chains. So to start with, I'm actually going to throw to Claire. Claire was obviously part of this panel last year. And just Claire, obviously there's been a fair bit that's happened in the geopolitical landscape over the past year. Sort of what have been the biggest changes you've noted over the past 12 months?
Thank you. Oh, it is working. Yeah, I was reflecting earlier today that it has been a year since I sat here and spoke about the interests of Korean companies and potentially looking at investing in Africa. And as I reflected on what it is that we're seeing in critical minerals, a thought keeps coming back to my mind that I heard at a lunch where countries that don't have resources plan really well for what they need. But countries that do have resources, and Australia likewise, feels that we can leave the development of our resources up to commerce and business, but without the intentional planning that sometimes goes behind that you see in jurisdictions like Singapore or Korea or Japan. And so when I think about the geopolitical shifts, we've obviously got a lot of concerns around, for example, 98% of the solar panels globally are made in one jurisdiction. And so now there's a global concerted effort around looking at changing that and getting some more competition into the supply chain. So what does that mean for countries in Africa and also like Australia? Well, I think it means we really have to think about what part can we play in that further downstream processing? Where can we add value? What is it sensible for us to do? Because we're not going to grab the entire supply chain, but there is a possibility of adding bits of that supply chain, so some downstream processing in country before it's exported everywhere else. And I think Australia and countries in Africa are really aligned on that, and it will help with some of those geopolitical issues that we're seeing emerging around supply chain and control of the processing of critical minerals.
Thanks, Claire. And Simon, obviously you've just stepped into this role in the last year, but previously you had been doing a lot of business in South America, but also here in Western Australia. How have you found sort of the move into Africa, and sort of just touching on sort of what Claire said, the emergence of Africa as a potential source for these critical minerals?
Yeah, look, thanks, Michael. Firstly, if I focus on lithium, which you can understand with Leo Lithium, I showed a chart earlier in my presentation which showed around 40 lithium projects globally. 8 of those are in Africa, and 2 of the top 8 in that top quadrant are in Africa. So Africa certainly has a large part to play in the lithium industry coming up. Those 2 projects, ours being one of them, in the top quadrant, are yet to be developed. So these need to be brought online and developed and included into the global supply chain for electric vehicles. So that's still in front of the continent. They're not the first projects to be developed lithium projects to be developed in Africa. There's a long-term one in Zimbabwe that's been in production for quite a period of time. So Africa will certainly play a large part in the lithium industry over the longer term.
And Andrew, you've been in Africa for certainly as long as I can remember, in my time at Paydirt, in particular in Tanzania. If you sort of reflect on your time in country and the emergence of critical minerals, and in your case graphite, how have you seen the landscape changed over a decade or so?
Oh, thank you, Michael. It's nice to be back. Yes, that's right. We've been in Africa, Tanzania, looking at developing a natural flake graphite project with the view of developing it with the emergence of graphite being a major contributor to the transition to clean energy. I think over here in West Australia, we live in the land of lithium and everybody thinks it's a lithium battery. So graphite is a major raw material for this transition, and graphite is, or East Africa, Tanzania, Mozambique and Madagascar are going to play a major role in the supply of this material outside of China. So I think in terms of, if you look at West Australia as I do, it's the cathode and it's the positive part of the battery. We've been on the anode, and Africa, particularly East Africa, is on the anode, and there's a great change coming. There's a huge surge of raw materials, and I think if you look at 2030, the demand for graphite is going to be around 4 million tonnes per annum, and today there's 0. So there's a lot of work to be done for the world to have graphite, purified spherical graphite or battery anode material for this lithium-ion battery supply chain.
Well, and Tim, right on the end there, we were having a chat at your booth earlier today about obviously the emergence of rare earth in particular over the last 12 months, but I guess probably one in particular reason for you is that as obviously we're seeing Uganda and some of that sort of East African scope emerge as a potential destination for rare earth opportunities. Can you sort of touch on your experience over this last year or so?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So our experience with Uganda has been fantastic. We acquired our initial 20% interest in Makuutu about 3 years ago. Through that 3-year period, we've had to deal with COVID, which we've invested in capacity and capability in Uganda. We've used Ugandan service providers. We've been able to define a very large mineralised system at Makuutu with the potential to expand it further. We're getting very close now on completing our ESIA, working towards a feasibility study that will support a mining licence application on the Makuutu Central area. So all of that within a 3-year window. We wouldn't have been able to do it without the support of key stakeholders in Uganda. So we're very appreciative of the support we've received.
Excellent. And one of the things we also touched on, Tim, was about even though you are at a very early stage of project development, you are already starting to consider downstream options. Why have you made the decision to sort of think that far ahead in the piece?
So at Makuutu, we make a very unique product. So it's being an ionic adsorption clay, the only downstream processing capability for it effectively is China. In order to to market our product into Western markets, we have to develop downstream capability. There are a number of other potential players in the heavy rare earth refining space. They simply don't have the heavy rare earths. We have, a massive resource, multi-generational. So for ionic, it makes sense to look at going downstream.
And Claire, if I can come back to you, in your opening remarks, you made the comments about downstream and that more and more countries are looking to retain that value within the country. Why has that been the case, and in particular, why has it become so demanding over the last 12 months or 2 years?
It's a really good question, and I think it is those geopolitical tensions that we're seeing. There's such a domination of processing through China, and it seems that globally people have woken up to the risk that's associated with that. And so Australia obviously is focusing on it, and I would encourage all of the African countries who have an interest in mining to also look at that as well and see if you can develop further downstream processing activities and add an ESG component to that so you get an uplift in pricing. Soon I can foresee the world moving to a place where there will be premiums paid for certain metals that are mined to a certain standard, and you can track exactly where that particular piece of lithium, I don't know how to describe it, has come from, where it's been processed through, make sure there's nothing in that supply chain, and ultimately if it ends up in a Tesla battery, they will be able to sell that product. It has a premium on it already because it's an EV and it has lower emissions, but also there's and the customer is willing to pay that premium. And you can see this developing across all aspects of the supply chain. We're cusping on it now. There's a few people putting ideas out into the marketplace around an ESG premium on certain minerals. And I think we will see much more of that movement because we do know it's more expensive to process in different jurisdictions. It's certainly more expensive to process in Australia. Perhaps Africa doesn't face those problems in terms of the CapEx and OpEx cost, but there'll be other difficulties. For example, where do the reagents come from in terms of these downstream processing facilities? Can they be made locally or will they need to be imported in? So there will be some additional costs that perhaps aren't faced in the current processing jurisdictions, but certainly I think countries in Africa can take advantage of this global trend towards diversifying supply chains outside of, in particular, China.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. It's obviously really well received there in the audience.
Thank you.
Simon,
I didn't pay him any money.
Simon, you're obviously also on the cusp of, in fact, you've almost got the hand hovering over the development button for your Goulamina project in Mali. Downstream is also something that you're considered. Were some of the factors there that Claire mentioned, are they front in mind in the decision to look at downstream options?
Yeah, they absolutely are, Michael. I think, first of all, the Malian government, I think, has taken a really prudent approach with downstream lithium conversion. They understand that you need to have a mine and a concentrator up in the first place before it's viable to think about the next step. So we're certainly getting all the encouragement on the upstream end. There's discussions happening around the next stage, but we need to be viable and in production for us to take that next step. I think there needs to be, if you think about lithium conversion, there's a lot that goes into it. They're billion-dollar plants. Certainly if you look at Kwinana and Kemerton here in Australia, in Western Australia, it's a billion-dollar investment. But there's so much that hangs around those projects. It's not just the investment. You need reagents, what Claire talked about. You need access to cheap power, hopefully green power, water, disposal sites for your waste products, your byproducts, or an outlet, more importantly than a waste, if you can convert it into a byproduct. Access to technology, access to people, a skilled workforce. So there's so much that goes into the next stage of downstream conversion. We would certainly like to build that capacity somewhere in West Africa, in Mali, over the longer term, and we'll definitely be in discussion with the government at the right time.
Thank you. Well, and Andrew, you have made the decision to go downstream, and you are looking to build your facility here in Perth down at Kwinana, as Simon just mentioned. Can you explain sort of to the audience as to why you've made the decision to put the downstream facility here in WA as opposed to in Tanzania?
Yes, no, absolutely. Over the last 6 years, we've developed a technology that takes natural flake graphite, mechanically shapes and purifies it to the grade, the specification that's required for the anode and cell manufacturing. We elected to locate the first facility here in West Australia largely because of the government's push for modern manufacturing and this value-adding, and we bought into that, and we're going through the approvals process for the first stage demonstration plant here. The value proposition is significant. Each step you obviously go downstream, where the reason for it is because the strong government support to see the value adding of materials here in West Australia. We also see that, you know, West Australia should have battery manufacturing, and it's really pleasing to see over the last couple of days we've seen Chris Allison from Mineral Resources talk about battery manufacturing. We've had IGO and Andrew Forrest talk about battery manufacturing, and West Australia should battery manufacture, but I think what we're seeing now is enormous pull from Europe and the US, the Mineral Security Partnership announcement that was done by the US a week ago or so about looking to relocate the supply chain into these regions, and you know, that's a real threat for Africa. It's a real threat for West Australia, and we have to work together to really make this happen. It's not easy. I think we're all here saying it is challenging. So it's a great opportunity, and I think the world's going to need a freight load of raw materials. It's where it's going to be located, and we're positioning in WA because of the battery manufacturing opportunity WA presents and the cathode endowment that's here.
Yeah, Claire, I can see you're nodding quite profusely sort of there. So obviously the points that Andrew are making there resonate. But just adding on to that, can you see it being feasible within the near term for some of these downstream facilities to be built within the African continent itself?
Well, I think there's the primary objective, which would be getting the mine up and running and having that established, but there should be that secondary consideration that no country really wants to be a quarry to the world. Every country aspires, that has resources, to move further down that processing chain. But I think there's a balance to be had around how far down that processing chain you can move, and Australia faces the same issue. We need to contemplate that if we process something in our jurisdiction, effectively we're taking jobs out of wherever that is currently being processed. So there is always that tension, particularly because often partners in these mining projects are seeking that offtake as well. So normally, let's say, for example, Korea, you might have a Korean company investing in your mining project because they want the offtake from it. But at the moment, they may well have a full supply chain set up within Korea. So if they move some of that processing to your home jurisdiction, actually they're in a sense disrupting and moving jobs and the supply chain that they already have established. So it needs to be sensible for both parties, but I wouldn't take your eye off the objective, which is to get a little bit further down that supply chain. When that would happen, I'm not sure. I mean, Australia's still struggling, and we've been mining and been a very successful mining jurisdiction for a number of years.
Yeah, thanks,
but
Claire.
there's probably people better qualified to answer that on the panel than me.
That's right. Well, I'm actually going to throw to Tim now because obviously over the past, particularly over this year, we've seen the geopolitical tensions rise in Europe in particular, and everyone has really scrambled for the supply of some critical minerals. In particular, rare earths has probably been the flavour of the month for the past 6 months, no pun intended there. But have you started to see that, even though you are at that early stage of development, that a lot of interest is coming around the security supply of rare earths?
Michael, tremendous interest, and it increases each month. Since the start of the year, we've had inquiries, obviously, from Europe and a number of different, member states within Europe, the US, UK, India, Japan, all looking at securing the magnet rare earths and the heavy rare earths they need for their manufacturing into the future. China completely controls the supply chain with regards to both magnet rare earths and heavy rare earths. These are extremely critical for not just automotive, renewable energy, but military and defence. So, the desire is really around security of supply, being able to get access to the materials and get that material into their own manufacturing.
Fantastic. Well, Simon, Mali has obviously also had its own geopolitical issues over the past year or so. Have those things come up in discussions or any concerns from investors, other stakeholders around security of supply because of where your project is located?
Yeah, very definitely. I think there's a discount on the Leo Lithium share price due to our location being Mali. Mali's certainly going through a challenging period. It's very dynamic. In the course of this year, we had the ECOWAS sanctions being put in place. First of all, on 9th of January, my first day in the job, the sanctions were announced, and share price dropped 20%. So that was a challenging start in the company. But we've seen them being resolved over the last few months. The government is committed to a timetable for a return to elections and democracy, and that's all the sanctions lifted. The sanctions certainly haven't had an impact on our project at all. We're at the early stages, where there's a lot of, with Mali's long mining history, there's a lot of equipment, a lot of skills already in country. Bring in manufactured goods is certainly an area where we need to be mindful of. Borders need to be open at the right time for us to when we need to build the project. So the geopolitical side of things we pay close attention to. We've seen the French armed forces leave Mali, and Russia's certainly playing a part, supplying some arms into Mali in their fight against the insurgency in the north of the country. So it's of utmost importance for us, for our staff. We need to keep the staff safe, and we need to ensure that we can manage in that environment. And so far, so good.
Excellent. And you mentioned obviously there, Simon, about the in-country sort of skills that have been built up over many, many years. How much of an advantage is that in being able to take a project going forward?
Yeah, it's a huge advantage. Well, firstly, there's the local content side of things. The government and Leo Lithium are very keen to have a very strong local content across labour as well as supplies. And it's much easier for that to occur when there's an established mining industry. So we're seeing many great resumes hit our inboxes. We're in a recruitment phase, and we're finding it quite possible to recruit locally. And over time, we need to build businesses, flow-on businesses around the mine site, across all the major services that need to be provided to a big mine and concentrator operation. We expect those to evolve over time, and we will be certainly nurturing them and helping them get established as part of our not just an ESG side of the business. It's a natural part of the business. We need to develop these services alongside the Goulamina lithium project.
Yeah. Well, and Claire, Simon just mentioned obviously the ESG element in it, which has become more and more topical over the last couple of years. From a supply chain perspective, what are some of the ESG themes that you can see coming into the critical minerals discussion?
Certainly there's going to be a look through to where was it mined, what were the environmental standards that applied, the typical things that we would expect. There will also be looking in terms of modern slavery legislation, which in, for example, Australia is about to be tightened, so that the obligation to check with who has supplied goods to you is actually going to be extended to more of a due diligence obligation. So all of these factors will come into it, and I think you can anticipate that when it comes to funding, the financiers will be asking some pretty hard questions around those things, regardless of whether or not they're considered to be a green or an ESG financier. They themselves will have to justify financial instruments to different mining companies, and we can see this already in the press. So they'll want to make sure things have been done correctly from the beginning. So I think all of the ESG issues will be on the table. And mining companies, would do well to sort of start that process early and make sure they feel like they're on top of that before they go to finance, to prepare themselves for stakeholder engagement at any step of the project.
Yep, and fair enough too. And Andrew, you've been through a large chunk of that sort of process. Did you have some of those sort of discussions with different groups, in particular, say the WA government, where you're starting to talk about, bringing these materials from offshore into Western Australia?
I think our focus has been on developing a ESG compliant new supply chain that satisfies the end customers. And I think the end customers, like the battery manufacturers and the EV manufacturers themselves have to start walking the talk and ensuring the supply chain is meeting their requirements. And I guess we went through a bank due diligence process to make sure that we met with World Bank standards. We've developed a HF-free process. So a vertically integrated chain is really, supply chain is really compliant to this whole theme. I think, we're seeing out of the European Union, the Green Deal, I think it's around this ESG, blockchain, traceability, sourcing raw material, responsibly produced raw material, which is really a great fit for Australian companies working with Africa and developing their resources with the best interest to support the value adding, getting more out of their resources than just mining, and a theme that Claire's touched on and talked about. So it's we've got to work together, and I think we're going to see a lot more support coming out of the electric vehicle manufacturers. They have to step up and make sure that their supply chain is clean and green.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Andrew, put you on the spot.
Oh.
I said earlier that we're starting to see the emergence of discussion around an ESG pricing component on products. Are you starting to see that in your discussions when you talk about the end user wanting to make sure the supply chain is all okay? Are they happy to pay for that? Or do they just see, look, graphite is graphite?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And over the last 6 years, all we've heard is being cost competitive to China, price. And it's difficult to be cost competitive. I think the good news is there is going to be a differential between a Chinese domestic product and a rest of the world material. That's not on the doorstep yet. So I think a business has to be cost competitive with the Chinese supply, but there will be consideration for this processing and value adding in Europe, in Australia, in Africa, in the US. So we will see a pricing mechanism come in soon, I hope.
Fantastic question there, Claire, and fantastic answer, Andrew. Well, I think I've asked enough questions, so I'd like to throw it open to the floor. We have some roving mics at the back, so if you have a question for one of our panellists, if you could please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Just one down here at the front, Viddy. Oh, sorry, no.
Nasser, Sudan. My question is to Tim. What determines the decision to invest in the rare earth elements in Africa in particular? Understanding the complexity of the geological side of these kind of minerals.
Great question. I suppose, trying to understand the rare earth market and the investment opportunity and where the pressure points or where the tightness is going to come in the future. Certainly light rare earths are readily found around the world. Heavy rare earths are in scarce supply. So in order to develop the magnets, neodymium iron boron magnets, you need a small amount of dysprosium and terbium. These are heavy rare earths. 98% of the dysprosium and terbium that's produced today comes from China. Outside of that, China and Myanmar, that's where the production's coming from. So it's around basket, and then scale and longevity, I think. That'd be the things to focus on.
Viddy, there was just another question, gentleman, not to his left. To his right, sorry.
Hello, Mr. Nasser, Sudan. It is not a question, but it is a comment. I am happy to hear about the rare elements or rare metals, and what is speaking about the strategy of downstream, because in Africa we are looking at all the minerals are now, it is going outside as a raw material. But for the upstream to downstream, this is a very happy things, and we are going to increase the relationship between the Australia and Africa so as to transform the African mineral to the downstream to add value We are seeing that Australia is a real friend and real partner for the transformation of the African minerals to the added value so as to build the smelt and processing plant. So much. Thank you.
Did anyone have anyone to respond to? No, Tim. We have a video just behind you. The lady at the back, actually. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Wadzi from Nous Group. My question is for Tim and Andrew, specifically relating to skills. So I think Minister Johnston had on his slide that 1 in 4 of the college students of the future will be African. And when you think about a lot of Diversify WA's strategy is really about attracting talent to the state, and high-skilled talent will be important for the development of the critical minerals industries. So my question is, how does the abundance of youth on the African continent compared to the relative skills shortage or talent shortage in Australia factor into the calculus of where you operate your downstream operations, noting that you've made different decisions? So how did you think about youth and the opportunity inherent in that in your decision making?
That's a very good question, thank you. I guess we look at our development in Tanzania to very much rely on the local skills, and within the Tanzania community there's a very well-skilled workforce now, and that's thanks to the heritage of a lot of Australian companies that have been there planning and training, and they can, very much be exported to the rest of Africa. Certainly there's an opportunity for Australia to rely on some of that skill set, and during the last resource boom we did bring into Australia skilled Tanzanians that were quite proficient and geologists, and there's a great crossing of skills. There's no doubt we're suffering skills shortage in Australia, and that is one of the hamstrings that we've got to deal with, and the government's has to look at ways of importing new skills. So very supportive of initiative. If you've got initiative, we're happy to get behind it.
Thanks, Andrew. I suppose from our perspective and how we're looking at developing Makuutu and then the strategy of going downstream, presently we're sponsoring a PhD student out of Uganda doing a PhD here in Australia in geology. We've got sponsoring a master's student doing further studies on metallurgical processing in Cape Town. The desire is to build capacity in Uganda. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of investment, and it'd be great to see more education and more pathways to being able to support downstream processing in Africa in the future rolled out. It will take time. As far as our thoughts about going downstream, again, we will be mining and producing a value-added product in Uganda. We also have to look at the value addition beyond the separation refining to go to metals, alloys, magnets, and again, that's a tremendous amount of processing capability that you can't just pick that up and replicate it. It takes a long time to build that capacity. So it's something that I would fully support, but there has to be a timed development.
Okay, we are just about out of time, so I'm conscious that while everyone here is hungry for critical minerals, they're also hungry for some actual food. So just before we wrap up, I just wanted to get a quick comment from each of our panellists on the opportunity they see for critical minerals development in Africa. I'll start with you, Simon.
Yeah, the opportunity is right there. Africa has a mining history. There's great, if you look at the battery minerals, I think there's an endowment across the continent, and the demand is definitely there, and the demand is on the doorstep. So Europe and North America a lot closer to a lot of the mineral fields in the battery mineral space than Asia is. So there is an advantage for Africa in terms of geography, and they've got that mining pedigree. So yeah, and the endowment. So definite opportunity, really obvious to me.
I'm not sure I have much more to add to that. There's a definite opportunity there, and I think, like Australia, focus on not just being a quarry to the world, which is sometimes what Australia has been, and where you can take a little bit further of the piece of the pie that we often see disappearing to other jurisdictions and not seeing the value in our own home jurisdictions. But the opportunity's there, and really the time is now with the demand for these to help decarbonise the world.
Andrew?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with all of the above. And Tanzania has a great opportunity to develop new mines, new downstream opportunities after the mines are constructed. But also one thing that I haven't touched on as part of our business is recycling. Recycling is going to play an awful amount, a great opportunity as part of the supply chain and raw materials fitting into the circular economy. So I think Africa has a huge role to play on the recycling front as well.
And finally, you, Tim?
Yeah, I think the opportunity for Africa is tremendous. You look at the projected growth in renewable energy, EVs. It's phenomenal. That sort of growth over the next decade and beyond. It is a little bit hard to fathom, and so Africa has a tremendous opportunity to be front and centre, supplying the critical raw materials, and with investment in infrastructure and training and capability, a great opportunity to have a larger involvement in the downstream supply chain.
All right. Well, fantastic summaries there. If you could please thank our panellists.